I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast, and we're very happy today to be joined by he's down in this corner over here, but he'll be enlarged here in just a minute. That's Dominic of the Maccabean Uprising. We've had him on several times in the last few months to talk about yeah, I guess what are the words, the mirroring,
Yeah,
the thing, yeah, the things in common from the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Gospels, and the Novus Ordo Church, or the church, as we see it in the last 100 years or so. It's very fascinating stuff, and it's something that Dominic has spent years putting together this information and researching it and putting in detail after detail after detail. And it's fascinating. And before we get going, we do want to say that it is just really his own research. We're not priests, we're not theologians, we're not any authority. This is just two guys talking about interesting topics. Now, that means pretty much take it as you will. But that being said, it's really fascinating, and to me, I find it something that really helps me to learn my faith and to understand it, and to, I don't know, just have an interesting conversation. I mean, really, today we're going to talk about America and the ancient world, ancient Rome, and how it kind of reflects on each other. And okay, I guess that's not really too much about our faith, I suppose, but you just see kind of how God works
yeah,
in mysterious ways and glorious ways, and that's really interesting. And so again, take it for what it's worth. You don't have to believe any of this. This is totally opinion. It's fine. Don't freak out about it. If you have any questions about it, it's fine, first of all, and then go talk to a priest. But Dominic, I know, wanted to, before we get started, wanted to pray a Hail Mary. First of all, maybe so that our all of our tech kind of goes right, which is always an if. But
right.
also, of course, that the information is good, and that we, are, as always, as we both, I think, try very much to do to further God's glory. So Dominic, if you would, let's please say a Hail Mary.
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy
Holy
Mary,
Mary,
Mother of
Mother of
God,
God,
pray
pray
for us
for us
sinners,
sinners,
now and
now
at
and
the
at the
hour of
hour
our
of our
death.
death.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. And this reminds me that I had a little picture of Our Lady that I wanted to put, and because we flipped around the screens, there, I'll put her back over here so we can see her.
Perfect.
There we go. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. There's a lot to talk about today. I have a ton of information. Can you hear me, by the way? I
I
can't
hear
hear
you fine.
myself.
I hear you
Okay,
fine. Yep.
always worried about that. You mentioned that, yeah, today we'll do Rome and America, and to see how amazingly, just how we did in previous episodes with you. The first one I did in terms of like prefigurement was the Old Testament and church history prefiguring. And what I want to, this is like a corollary of that, today's presentation, because inside of the Old Testament history is the history of Rome. It's part of that Old Testament history. There's not a whole lot about Rome written into the Old Testament until you get to the very end of the Old Testament. But nonetheless, Rome was settling. It was growing as a city, and it was expanding as an empire during the time of the Old Testament. So that's kind of what I want to start with. And it does kind of like touch upon our faith a little bit in the end, because we're called the Holy Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church. So we even have Rome in our name. So Rome has always been central to church history, and even to the Old Testament times, because it was what would they call it, the eternal city. Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I guess we'll start with this. This is a refresher, but this is the Old Testament on the bottom and church history on the top. And of course, we can't go through it all again, but we do have that one episode where you interviewed me, I think 2 months ago, where we went through this. And basically, the premise is that all of church history prefigures or is prefigured by the Old Testament in chronological order, even Vatican II at the end. So that being said, let me go and show you here how Rome fits into this, because there we go. Okay, so here you have the start of America really was the Jamestown colony in 1607. And the Rome started as a colony as well in 753. So that's where you have Romulus and Remus. They're going out from their grandfather, Numitor, I believe I forget his name, but there was a king of Alba Longa, and they wanted to start their own city. And they had that legendary fight. There was the fight between the Palatine Hill and the, let's see, I'm forgetting the other hill that Remus wanted. Anyway, that started in 753 BC was when they were founding Rome. Jamestown colony was 1607. You could see on this chart here that those two times are the same if you look at the parallel system. 753 BC is contemporaneous with 4 Kings, chapter 14 and 15, which is right in that period there where it's highlighted. What was going on in church history was after Luther's revolt and after Christendom was split in two. And in the Old Testament, that was after Jeroboam's revolt and the nation of Israel was split in two. So that's in that same period there. And so let me move on from that a little bit. I just want to set the foundation that this is part of the system of parallels that we're going to go into. That makes sense. Okay.
Well, and again, as you say, I want everyone to know that we will of course share a link to that original podcast, because that might help explain. If you haven't seen that original podcast, gosh, I don't even remember the name of it. Church history, parallels of church history, or Old Testament and New Testament, something like that. Yeah. I'll attach the link, and maybe really though, if you haven't seen that one, maybe go watch that one first. We'll attach the link. Go watch that one, and then come and watch this one, because I think then you'll get a bit better of a grasp of, okay, what on earth are you guys talking about? I think a little more sense.
All right, exactly. Okay, good. All right, so then this is the map of Roman history. I'll start here now with this. And we went over this also very quickly in our last interview when we were talking about a different subject, even still. Right. But let me I'm gonna take myself out of the way for a second so you can see better. All right. So if you look on the very left, you have the founding of Rome in 753 and the Jamestown colony. And I'm gonna fly through this because I have a lot of information to cover today. So then Rome and America both were Jamestown were both ruled by kings, if you notice. At that point onward, we had the British kings rule over the colonies and the Roman kings rule over Rome. There were 7 of them until Rome founded its republic. And likewise, America founded a republic as well. This is what we're going to cover today. I have a lot of detail. But this is the skeleton of Roman America. And these are the big parallels here. I'm going to get into some of the details in a little bit. Before I start, though, I want to show you this real quick, because this even goes back deeper than Rome and America. Rome was probably really a Greek colony to start with. All right, obviously the legend of Romulus and Remus is probably a legend. Obviously they weren't demigods. The legend of founding of Rome has that Romulus and Remus were sons of the god Mars, which obviously is just a legend. It's a pagan legend. But really, you'll find that there's evidence that Rome was a Greek colony. And the ancient Greeks colonized the Mediterranean like the British colonized the world, right, in the 1800s. So again, going back to that system of parallels that I showed you originally, the British and the Greeks have a very intense chronological series of parallels between them. Like the Hellenization of the world was like the Americanization or the Anglicization of the modern world. Like, they speak English in India and Australia, and all over the world has English speakers because the British colonized everywhere, just like the Greeks did here. So if you kind of go backwards from the founding of Jamestown and the founding of Rome, you'll even go back further and see this colonization period that was taking place. And even prior to that, this is going way off the chart, but I'm going to mention it anyway. The fall of, so remember this is going to be way back, but the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are those Greek legends, the legend of the fall of Troy, which is in the 12th century BC. It's kind of it's definitely a legend, and it's thought that the Iliad and the Odyssey were historical accounts written into like a legendary story form. They obviously weren't true, right? Achilles wasn't invincible except for his Achilles heel, and there's all those things. The Odyssey of Odysseus when he went out and fought the Cyclops and Medusa, all that's just a legend. But there's similar legends in English history as well. So, like what I'm saying is, remember the Greeks and the British have these parallels. There's the Arthurian legends of King Arthur and the Round Table and Lancelot and Guinevere. So they have, if you go back to the fall of Troy, you have this figure Helen of Troy, who was kind of seduced by Paris. You have those same things happening in the Arthurian legends with Guinevere and Lancelot. And I don't want to get into it all, but you can trace all of those legends in Britain to the legends of Greece, and you see parallels the whole way through, right? So I'm saying how deep this goes. Like the roots of these parallels go all the way back. The fall of Troy is like the fall of Jerusalem, and I guess I'm getting way off the charts, but I just want to kind of lay that out there to start with. And then I'm going to show you this as well. This is just a quick graph that I did a long time ago. that shows, if you look at the sea charts and forget the land things, look at the sea categories, and you'll see the beginning of Greek colonization and the beginning of English colonization, they parallel, and so did their endings. The end of the Greek colonization period ends just about when the British were wrapping up their empire period in the early 1900s. So I just want to, again, show how systematic and thorough this is before I start talking about America. Like I said, I'm going to pack a lot of information into this podcast, so I do apologize for your brains being blown up, but I want to get it all in. All right, so now we have, let me go back here for a second. Okay, the beginning of, okay, yeah, here we go. The beginning of Jamestown. All right, so I'm going to switch over now to some slides. Okay, all right, so here we have Jamestown and early Rome. Now, both Jamestown and early Rome, they were founded by men. So remember, the Romulus and Remus, they started Rome, and the way they got colonists for their new city was they attracted all of the outcasts of other cities, like the prisoners or the exiles or the criminals. And so they had a bunch of rough and gruff men in Rome, and they had no women there. So Jamestown, same thing. They had an early problem in the Jamestown colonies. I have to get something up real quick here. Sorry about this. All right. All right, here we go. Okay, so Jamestown had no women as well, so they had to mail order in brides from England, which they came. You see a picture of them coming on a boat, and all the men were welcoming the women. Now, the Romans, what they did was they had something called the rape of the Sabines. They had no women, and therefore they knew their colony wasn't going to advance, so they went to a neighboring tribe and they stole all the women. And so what happens next is, I'm going to go back a little bit here. Okay, so the Sabine tribe, they realized they had all the women stolen from them, and they go and they go to attack the early Roman colony. And the Sabine women, they come out in the middle and they throw their hands up and say, listen, we stop fighting. We don't want our fathers, the Sabine men, to kill our new husbands, the Roman men. So they made a peace between the two. And that was the Sabines kind of became friends with the Romans at that point. But it was because of the Sabine women who were just stolen from the Romans who did that. Now in Jamestown colony, you have the early colonists. They had a problem with women, but they solved that with the mail order bride scam or ordeal. But they did have a problem with no food. So they were going to starve to death. So they stole food from the Powhatan tribe. And they were going to kill. Remember the story of James Smith, the legendary founder or the leader of the Jamestown colony? John Smith. John Smith. All right, thank you. Okay, so remember they were going to kill him, and then Pocahontas comes out and throws her hands up and says, "Stop, stop!" Right? She goes on to marry one of the Jamestown colonists and goes back to England. So you have Pocahontas being like the Sabines here, kind of stopping that initial slaughtering of the early colony. Let's see. Go in here. Okay, so the Jamestown colony that's where the House of Burgesses started, which was the very prototype of the American Congress. The House of Burgesses turned into the Continental Congress, which turned into the American legitimate U.S. Congress. So you can see its progression from that Jamestown colony. That's why Jamestown really is like the nucleus, the start of America, because the system of government came out of Jamestown. It grew into the Virginia colony, which grew into the center of American politics or American government. And so the same thing happens with Rome. Romulus starts the Senate in Roman history, and then that keeps on growing until you have the full-blown Roman Senate later on. So that's why I pinned Jamestown to Rome. They both ruled under kings for a while. Let me go back to that slide again if I can find it. And kind of go back to this for a second. Okay, so they're both ruled by kings. Okay, right, and then the republics formed in 1776. It's in 1789 together, I guess you could say. And Rome forms its republic in 509. And again, they match chronologically, right? So, and just to show you that I'm not skewing these numbers, in the top of the graph, you have the 100-year increments, 1600, 1700, 1800. On the bottom half, it's like 120, 170-year increments, 175. I do a little rounding, but it's pretty close. But so the increments aren't changing. And so they actually, when you line them up, they parallel, right? The chronological nature of them are lining up. You just have to change the time scale on the bottom and the top, but it's still amazing. And then when you get to the end of the graph, you can see that those time scales break down a little bit because I go from 2000 to 2020, but similarly, I go down in the bottom, I go from 40 BC to 1 BC. So I just change that. I elongate that last period in case you're wondering what's happening. Okay, there's a lot going on. Now, both Rome and America, they go on to get my slideshow here, start expanding into their peninsula. Here, I'll show this one. Okay, here we go. All right, this is America and Rome's expansion between America, 1861 to 1865 is the Civil War, but America has this thing called manifest destiny, where they feel like they're destined to conquer the whole continental USA from coast to coast, and they do that by 1865. And Rome does the same thing by 275. So what's going on here is the Roman road system, which is in the center of the peninsula mostly, and the American railroad system. That gives them the ability to quickly send troops and supplies and communications throughout the peninsula very quickly. So there's a war here called the Pyrrhic Wars in 280, which I'm showing on the left side, and the Civil War, right? In both cases, Rome has to, they win this victory against the southern Greek colonies, mostly because of the road system. So have you ever heard of the thing, there's an expression called a Pyrrhic victory. So if I say, well, I had a Pyrrhic victory, it means that I expended so many resources or troops or money to win that was basically like I lost anyway. Victory came at a very high cost. And that was named after these Pyrrhic Wars that happened. There was a Greek general named Pyrrhus who beat the Romans in a battle, but he lost so many troops in doing it that he said, if I do that again, it's like, what's his quote here? He says, if we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. That's what his quote was. And that's the Civil War, where you have these massive loss of troops on both sides. And it's like, what are we fighting for? We're losing so many soldiers. The reason, though, that the Romans beat Pyrrhus, even though they're both losing massive amounts of people, was because Rome could resupply so quickly, because Rome had the roads and the South didn't. And those Roman roads gave Rome the ability to quickly get troops down to the South and also communicate very quickly, whereas the Southern forces couldn't. Just like in the American Civil War, the South didn't have the railroad system or didn't have the telegraph system nearly to the extent that the North did. And because of that, even though they were both losing massive amounts of troops, the Union could resupply their troops very quickly, and the telegraph system and the communications go so well. And that enabled the Union forces to defeat the Confederate forces in parallel. I'm going to show also on this map what's going on here. There's on the left, it says Magna Graecia. In the north, you have New England on the right side. Remember I told you about the parallels between the Greeks and the English. Well, there was this part of southern Italy that the Romans called Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece, that they loved it as an elite resort spot. So there was all of the educated and very intellectual Romans would go to Magna Graecia for learning. And they'd also go there for resorts and retreats. It was like the elite getaway spot, just like Martha's Vineyard or New England is for us. All of the Ivy League schools are in New England. And like Martha's Vineyard, like I said, is where Obama has that mansion, and Bush does probably too. And that's where Joe Biden always goes on resort all the time. In fact, Tiberius, one of the later emperors, was accused of like always hiding out in his resort in Capri and never like going to Rome to administer the government. Just like we're saying the same thing about Biden now. Like he's like, oh, well, he's always in Martha's Vineyard or in Connecticut, and he should be in Washington, D.C. But these are more general parallels, but I just want to throw them in there. Okay, now with Rome and America, they both expanded through the use of treaties. So, and war and conquest. Let me go back to this slide and show you that for a second. Okay, I have to keep on pulling this up every time and it slows me down. But all right, here we go. Okay, so the Romans fought the Samnite Wars and other wars like the Latin Wars and and these wars were wars with tribes on the peninsula they had to conquer in order to get the whole peninsula for themselves. So they fought some of them, and they offered treaties with others. And many times the treaties they offered, every time they didn't make the tribes Roman citizens. They just let them have a little place to self-govern and to kind of live in Rome's shadow. But they weren't Roman citizens until a certain point they were, but I'll get into that. And the same thing happens with the American Indian Wars. As look at even their headdresses are the same. I was amazed to find out that Samnites had feathers in their hats. I was like, what? Whoa, they have feathers in their hats? Like, that's amazing, right? So but the Americans are fighting the same thing with the American Indian Wars, and the same thing we do with Rome, wherein we have reservations for the Native Americans, the Indians, and we let them self-govern. They weren't American citizens until 1924, where President Coolidge granted citizenship to all Native Americans, just because at that point, America was so pervasive and situated and strong that it didn't matter if they were citizens or not. So he just said, go ahead and be citizens now. But the same thing happened in Rome. They had a war called the Social War, where those little tribes that have been assimilated or almost assimilated finally won citizenship rights as well. And that parallels, the time periods all parallel. All right. Whew, I'm trying to cover a lot. I'm going to move on here to, I did the Pyrrhic Wars. All right. Okay. So now you have, let me go back to this again. Rome also had a period here where they were fighting for political rights. Remember and let's go to America first, but the early American voting system was just for white landowners, usually kind of wealthy. And then there was a political disagreement or a fight that took place. And it kind of ended in 1870 with the 15th Amendment, which gave all males the right to vote, even freed slaves, and you didn't have to be a landowner anymore. So the kind of disenfranchisement of the lower classes was over, and now they could vote again. They could vote now. Rome had the same thing called the conflict of the orders. In early Roman history, you had to be of the patrician class to govern. The Senate was just patricians. And so the plebeian class, the lower classes, they pretty much went on strike, and they kind of subterfuged a lot of things until finally they were given also a representative body in the Roman governing system. It was called what's it called? I have it written down here, but I can't remember. Oh my goodness, concilium plebii, I think it was called. Anyway, that was settled in 287, which is, like, again, on the parallel chart there, that happens just at the same time as the 15th Amendment's coming into play. You have George Washington, going back a little bit. He's like Cincinnatus. We talked about that in one of the last podcasts. But basically, Cincinnatus was he had a little farm in Rome, but he also was a capable general. And there was a particular tribe that was threatening Rome, and they called up Cincinnatus as a dictator, and they said, "Go take care of the problem." And he had those powers of a dictator. He didn't have to, get permission from the Senate for certain things. He could just go out and act. And he settled the problem very quickly. And he by law, he could have been dictator for another year and retain that power, but he didn't. He said, "I'm done. I served the Republic, and I'm going to go back to my farm and just kind of be poor and be a farmer again." Well, George Washington was hailed by a French author and has been seen as a new Cincinnatus many times over, because he also was given the same kind of opportunity. He was made the commander-in-chief or the general of the revolutionary forces, and he won the battle. He won the war, and then he laid down his generalship or whatever, and he went back to his farm in Mount Vernon. And so they were so impressed by his civic virtue that they said, "Well, how about you be the next president?" And that's the same thing with Cincinnatus, or the first president. Cincinnatus also was made the consul of Rome, which was the equivalent of a president, because of the virtue they saw in him in not trying to retain power. They saw in Cincinnatus somebody who was not going to use the opportunities of his position to further gain for himself, but to serve the Republic, right? And that's that altruistic beginning that both Rome and America had. The Constitution was signed in 1789, and the 12 tables were the same thing in Roman history, because the 10 tables, actually, the first 10 tables were the basis of Roman law going forward. And they had to amend the 10 tables to add 2 more because they wanted to give more rights to the common people, just like how the Constitution has amendments as well. Okay, I'm going. You have the American railroad system and the Roman road system. We talked about that. All right, now I'm going to go forward a little bit here and move forward from this. Stop me if you want to say anything, please. I'm just talking all the time. Okay, now you have the labor wars. I might kind of get into that a little bit here. All right. Here you have the Roman slaves at one point. They rebelled. There's 3 separate wars called the Servile Wars, where the slaves rose up and they tried to assert themselves over the Roman government of the people and try to be freed. Well, in America, you have the labor wars, which I didn't know much about these. I was amazed to find out about them. So basically, you have all the Irish immigrants, mostly Irish immigrants, but a lot of immigrants are coming in, and they're making them work in West Virginia in the coal mines and other places as well. Maybe Pittsburgh had some servile work of these. And they were just very low paid. There's a song out there. It's an old American song. It's like the lyrics go, "You load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt." Okay, so the idea is that they were paying these workers in the coal mines with company money, and they control the prices in the company store. So no matter what these people did, as hard as they worked, they kept on going more and more into debt. And so they were keeping them in a virtual servitude, a slavery of kind. Well, they rose up, and it was the Blair Mountain Revolt, and they tried to fight back. The Americans sent in, the American military came and suppressed them and said, "You go back to your coal mines." So the same thing, Romans did the same thing with their survival revolts. They suppressed these poor people horribly. Okay, then here, I'm getting into some later ones, but let me see what I have first. I'm all over the place. Okay, oh good, we're on track. All right, let me show you something here real quick before I start this one, if I can remember where I put it. I'm all over. Sorry, just ignore this for a second, because we'll get into this in a minute. No, not that. Let's make sure I find out where. No, it's not that. Okay, wrong screen. All right, maybe it's over here. Oh yeah, it is. I see it now. Okay. All right. Oh, forget about that one. Okay. All right. So this is where we're going to start here. These are the major. There we go. Okay. These are the major American politicians, and I'm missing a lot. I know that this is a very cursory overview, but these are some of the major politicians, or you can even say that the major political eras from after World War II to Trump, our present day. And on the bottom, you have the same thing for the Romans. You have all of the major Roman politicians that were from the Punic Wars up until the end of the, up until Augustus, we'll say up until Augustus. I should mention here real quickly that, let me go back to this for a second. I should preempt with this screen, is that the Punic Wars, if you look in the bottom of the screen, the Punic Wars start in 264, the end in 146 BC. And the world wars are similar in American history. The Punic Wars were significant because after Rome filled out its peninsula in 275, they started to come in contact with other empires. And the first one they came in contact with was the Carthaginian Empire in the south. And that's the story about Hannibal Barca taking his elephants across the Alps and scaring Rome horribly. Hannibal was the boogeyman for the Romans. I mean, they would scare kids with tales of Hannibal. Hannibal's going to come get you. You know, we had the boogeyman in the world wars, which was Hitler. We had our boogeyman as well. And so, what happens though is when the Rome wins the Punic Wars, it sets them up as the superpower now in the Mediterranean Ocean. There's no one left to contend with them. And the same thing happens with the Roman Wars or the American Wars. After our victory in World War II, we were undisputed. Well, let me get to it. Not quite, right? We had the Soviets, but I'm going to get into that. But anyway, the point is that both wars launched America and Rome onto the international sphere, the international scene. All right, going back to this. So on the top, you have Eisenhower, the Kennedys, Nixon, Reagan, Bush, the Obama and Hillary and Bill. I call him Billary. Have you heard that before? Billary. I think it's pretty funny. Yeah. Okay. Right. And you have Obama and Trump. All right. So on the bottom, you have Gaius Marius, the Gracchi brothers, Sulla, Pompey Magnus, Julius Caesar. You've probably all heard of Julius Caesar. You have Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and you have Augustus Caesar. All right. So those are we're going to have to cover here in a second. Am I skipping anything real quick? I'm just check around, make sure I don't miss anything here. Before we do that one, let me go down this rabbit hole for a second. I'm going to show you this. All right. This is interesting. This relates to Vatican II. I'm going to touch upon this and then I'll get it done with and move on. But this is a map. This is a slide of. I'm sorry to do this to you. I always do this to you. So much information. On the left side is Alexander the Great's conquest, and after he dies, his empire is divided up into 4 parts. On the right side is the 4-part division of Germany after the Allied nations' victory of World War II. And without getting into details, Alexander the Great and Franklin Roosevelt, they both served for 12 years. They both died suddenly, and after they died suddenly, they both had their empire divided up into 4. This is the picture of that. Now, the next one is, okay, this is another map of this. This is the same split up with nicer graphics. You have the purple is the Seleucid Empire, and the yellow is the Ptolemaic. The other 2 aren't important, but the Seleucid ones what I really want to show you. Because the Seleucids are the ones who ended up in the books of the Maccabees. They're the ones who came into the temple and set up that abomination of desolation that we talked about in the system of parallels prior. And that period parallels Vatican II, right? Just because the Seleucids went in and put up a second altar and stripped the ornaments out, just like how the communists infiltrated the Vatican under Paul VI. And remember Bella Dodd said, and she testified before Congress, that 1,100 communists were put into the seminaries in the early 1900s or something like that, right? Okay, so the communists are infiltrating the church like the Seleucids infiltrated the temple. And okay, the reason why that's important, right? I just want to establish that. The Seleucids, okay, here we go. There's a story in, it's Antiochus. Antiochus was a Seleucid king. And this relates to Rome now. Okay, we're going to go back to Rome. He was trying to expand his influence in the West. Let me just back to the slide for a second. So as Rome is expanding after the Punic Wars, the Seleucids are expanding westwards as Rome's expanding eastwards. And they kind of meet down here in Egypt, down in Alexandria. So they had a Cold War actually too. Just like America and the Soviets had a Cold War, so did the Seleucids and the Romans. Neither of them fought each other directly, but they fought through proxies and through diplomacy and like things like that. So now, as Seleucids are expanding westwards, this is Antiochus the king. He goes to Egypt and he starts putting his warships in the Alexandrian harbor. And the Romans send an envoy down and tell him, like, get him out of there. We don't want your ships down there. This is Egypt's Roman territory, right? And so Seleucid, the king Antiochus says, let me go think about it. Well, the Roman envoy, he draws a circle around the king's feet. He says, don't leave this circle before you give me your answer. Either we're going to have war and you're going to get your ships out of the harbor, or you're going to retreat and you're going to take them out. So he says, don't leave the circle till you tell me. So Antiochus was embarrassed by this, but he capitulated. He said, okay. I'll take my ships out of Roman's Egyptian harbor and we'll retreat, right? And so on the right side, you have the Soviets, who are like the new Seleucids. They start putting their missiles in Cuba. And so Kennedy says, we're going to put up a quarantine line around Cuba, these circles, right? And he says, if any Soviet ships are found to enter the quarantine line, they're going to get sunk. So basically the same thing's happening here. They're putting a circle around Antiochus, they're a circle around the Soviets, and they're making them decide on the spot, what are you going to do? If you cross that line, you're in trouble. The same kind of scenario. And both were humiliated. Remember Khrushchev, who was the one who was starting this Cuban Missile Crisis, he also was embarrassed because he had to turn around and leave, and he kind of lost face with the Politburo back in Moscow. They ended up throwing him out because of this eventually. Anyway, now this is what's significant. So right after Antiochus gets embarrassed, he goes back to Jerusalem, and he puts up he goes and he invades Jerusalem. And it was the next year. So he gets embarrassed in 168. He goes to Jerusalem in 167 BC, and he invades Jerusalem. He puts up a second altar. He strips the ornaments down, which is the Vatican II of the Old Testament. So the same month as the Cuban Missile Crisis is when Vatican II starts. So if you have like right after the Missile Crisis is over, Vatican II starting at the same time, which is the new, it's the parallel for the Seleucids putting up a second altar and stripping the temple and all that stuff. That's what's happening to Vatican II, which is amazing because you can see here how the church history intertwines with the secular history of the Old Testament, or of our time, just like how the Jewish history intertwines with the secular or the profane history of the ancient world. I mean, because they're part of the same world, so of course they're going to interact. But I just want to kind of get that out of the way and show that, which is pretty neat. Now, wow. Okay, there's something else after this. I'll get into that later, but we're going to move on here to let's make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, what do I have under this? Okay, I have that. Okay, I cover all this stuff. Okay, I'm done with that. Okay, all right, and this. Okay, we're getting into that in a second. Oh yeah, okay. This is also where we're going to start with. This is a blown up version of the first graph. Remember the first chronological graph? This is the same thing, but it zones in on after World War II and after the Punic Wars. And if you can see here, I color coded things. You can loosely see how it goes. Remember the name, the Gracchi brothers? We're going to talk about those. Gaius Marius, we're going to talk about him. Sulla, Pompey, Caesar, these are the names we're going to talk about in a second. But you can see how the color coding, you can see how it kind of like loosely kind of parallels all the way through. And I should put a caveat here. I should say that the parallels between church history and the Old Testament seem much more clear and distinct, whereas the Roman American parallels, they're definitely there, but the pieces move around a little bit. So what I think I've seen or found or noticed, whatever, is that you take a Roman figure like Caesar, and you're going to break out his characteristics and his actions, and they break out into like Bush and Clinton or something like that. So like the two proximate American presidents both share in Caesar parallels. And if you kind of slide that time back, you'll see that it slides backwards. So like Eisenhower and Nixon both share in the Marius parallels. So it's a sliding thing, but it is chronological, but it's not like one for one. It's kind of, that's the best way I can describe it. Sure. Okay. All right. So we're going to go here to this next one. Okay. This is something, I'll get this out of the way too. This is another expansion of the Roman and the American Empire, so to speak. But this gets us to the Ukraine war real quickly. I want to show you that. Yeah, I'm glad I'm doing this. Okay. Oh, wait, stop it before it gets any further. Where am I at? Okay. All right, good. All right. So what's happening here? I need to go back a little bit. Okay. So this is the point when, oh no, sorry. Okay, this is the point when, in Roman history, remember I said how Rome was expanding eastwards and the Seleucids were expanding westwards, and they meet right here. Well, actually, they don't meet first. They the Seleucids, right here it is. The Seleucid kingdom gets disbanded. All right, Pompey Magnus goes and he ends the Seleucid kingdom, which is on life support at that point. And just like how the Soviet Union crumbles in 1991, and Reagan's the one whose witnesses that, and you'll see that Reagan and Pompey parallel. But what happens after the Seleucids are they get kind of like they get disbanded, that the Parthian Empire rises up and takes their place. So just like how after the Soviet Union falls, you have this new Russian Federation like forming with Putin. And so if you go down the line a little bit here from this point, you'll see that they meet at some point in Armenia. So right here, during Nero's time, right? Nero has this war over this Armenian territory, and both Parthia and Rome are putting puppet kings in there to try to get this puppet king to pass policies favorable to Rome, and then the Parthians uproot him and put a Parthian puppet king in, and back and forth, back and forth. Same thing's happening in Ukraine now, where we had an American puppet prime minister of Ukraine, and then Putin rolls in and puts his version in, and then you put Zelensky in, right? And so the same phenomenon is happening, and it's the same expansion. Remember, we hear criticism of the Ukraine war. It says NATO is expanding too much. Putin says, NATO is just coming too close, and I put a red line there. NATO can't go any further. Just like how Rome was expanding too, and there was this kind of like they wanted to have this buffer zone. So if the parallels hold, what we're going to have is the Ukraine war will fizzle out, and there's going to be like this kind of like this uneasy peace in Ukraine, as there was in the Parthian territories. Okay, I just want to get out of the way because I'm going to go back now to the meat and potatoes of everything. All right, now, oh boy, where are we at? Okay, here we have Eisenhower and Marius. Let me go through these quickly. Eisenhower and Marius were both war heroes turned into presidents or consuls. Eisenhower, he was a victor, a hero of World War II. He got a start as a general, really a popular general because of his victories in Africa, in North Africa. Same thing with Gaius Marius. He was such a brilliant general that they called him to be the consul of Rome. Remember, so Gaius Marius, though, he suspended. He made the argument that we had to compromise the ideals of the Roman Republic in order to save the Republic. So he would act like a dictator, and the Romans put up with that as long as they kept them safe. And in the Eisenhower years, you had the McCarthy era, the big Red Scare, where McCarthy was calling everyone a communist, and it started to get to the point where the Americans were saying, wait a minute, we're starting to compromise. You're acting like a dictator here. Like, you just say the word communist and we all have to run in fear, and we have to fire somebody and we have to get rid of them, And so the same idea was that the big Red Scare was so bad that we had to compromise our Republican ideals a little bit in order to save ourselves from the Russian threat. And that both was happening at the same time. Let's see, moving on from him. I can just get to the next one. Okay, now you have the Gracchus. Going down the line of Roman history, the Gracchi brothers, they were upper middle class Romans. They weren't quite patrician class, but they were upper middle class, and they were very idealistic. The left one was called Tiberius, the right one's called Gaius. Tiberius, the left one, was very eloquent, lofty in his speech, whereas Gaius was fiery and emotional. And they both had the same cause, they had different approaches to it. They were trying to get more rights for the middle-class Romans who were disenfranchised after the Punic Wars. And so they angered the Roman patrician class very much because the patrician class saw that their power and their money and influence was waning away. And these Gracchus are becoming very, very popular. And it scared the patricians in that they thought that Gaius or Tiberius Gracchi was going to become a king and do away with the republic. That's what they were saying, at least. That's what the patrician class was saying. So they assassinated Tiberius, and then Gaius comes and takes his place, and he was also assassinated by the Senate as well. And that was a heartbreaker because it was like all of the rank, all the lower class Romans, they thought like, oh look, there's no justice anymore. Like, it's like, I guess the rich are just going to always rule over us, and we have no recourse because they'll just kill us if we don't listen. and we see the parallels very clearly with the Kennedys. Obviously, I don't even have to go through them, But just to point out that John F. Kennedy was very lofty and eloquent, whereas Robert was more known to be emotional and vitriolic. Both with the same, they're both assassinated as well. So then, and they parallel as well. Okay, at the same time this was happening, go back. At the same time this was happening, Rome was establishing the grain dole. And so Rome, because of their newfound wealth after the Punic Wars, they start giving free grain to the Roman citizens. At the same time, America passes the Food Stamp Act in 1964. And both the grain dole and the food stamp or the welfare program, they both like get out of control. Like throughout Roman history, by the end, in the time of the Roman Empire, they're giving out massive amounts of free grain and wine to people. Like free wine, and there was a massive population. Yeah, right. Yeah, there's like a massive population of Roman citizens who didn't work. They just went to the games, had their free bread, had their free wine, and just maybe had a little fruit on the side somewhere. But that was good. And we see the parallel in America very clearly happening. And we have our games too. Like Rome had something called bread and circuses, and they intentionally kept their Roman citizens fed with free food and gave them free entertainment as a way to pacify them because they were afraid of riots erupting in Rome. And of course, we have the massive entertainment, all kinds in America, but we have our bread and circuses as well. Then we have, the next thing happening here is, this is the assassination of Gaius. There's Robert and Gaius. There is, I should just play this. Okay, there's the assassination of Tiberius and JFK. There's this particular detail about the head of Tiberius. This is kind of an anecdotal thing, but Tiberius was given a speech, and in the speech he was pointing to his head for some particular reason. I can't remember what it was. And the Senate said, look, he wants a crown on his head. He's trying to make himself the king. So they went and killed him because they claimed that they thought that he was trying to make himself the king. And of course, JFK, there was this focus on his head. I don't know. This is a very anecdotal little thing, but it caught my attention nonetheless. All right, going to the next one. Oh, I lost my slide. Everything's falling apart on me. All right, and this is JFK, a food stamp. All right, next is Nixon and Sulla. All right, so Sulla is the next major political figure that comes onto the scene. He comes after Gaius Marius. So Sulla was part of Marius's troops. He fought with Marius, and then he later disagreed with Marius. But similarly, Richard Nixon he got his start under Eisenhower. So even like the way these politicians they come up under each other in Rome and in America. So Sulla, he had a problem. Rome had a problem with the war veterans. They promised the Roman veterans that they would give them some land or some money after all their service. They came back with nothing. Like the Roman soldiers would go out onto these campaigns further and further away from the Italian peninsula. And in doing so, their farms fell apart, and the rich patrician class scooped up their farms and turned them into these massive farms. And the Roman veterans had to come back and find a panhandle in the streets of Rome. They were just left out to dry after the wars were over. So Sulla took a lot of disenfranchised Roman veterans, and he marched with them back to Rome and captured Rome, the March of the Roman Veterans. And during Nixon's time, you had the same thing happening with these Vietnam War veterans. They came back to nothing. What was happening in America was the oligarchs, the corporates, the corporate elites, whatever, they were consolidating their power so much that like the old American farm was going by the wayside. It's like in Rome, the same thing. So now you have all these veterans and other people all going to the cities in American history more and more to find increasingly less productive, less lucrative employment. And they weren't the masters of their own farms anymore. But anyway, so Nixon has all these veterans come back, and they had that march in Washington, D.C., and they camped out in the Washington Mall protesting the policies of the Vietnam War or whatever. But the point was that there's this march of veterans on the city, which was pretty cool. Sulla was the very first unelected leader of Rome. And Nixon, after he retired, Gerald Ford was because he was the vice president. He was the next person in line to be the president. But the problem was the situation was that Nixon's first vice president was his name Spirit Agnew. I forget his name, something Agnew.
Spiro Agnew, yeah.
Spiro, all right, okay. So he had to resign, and so Nixon took on Ford. But when Ford became president, he was never elected. He was the first unelected president in American history. He was never elected. He was appointed by Nixon and then been put into the position of the presidency, never elected. He never was on any ticket, any kind of campaign or election ticket. So they both, and it's also Sulla was the very first person to open up diplomatic relations with Parthia, just like Nixon was the very first president to go into China and open up diplomatic relations with China, communist China. Okay, there's more to this. Let me just, where am I at here? Just turn the page. Okay, so Sulla was known to be ruthless with his adversaries. He kept a list of political opponents, and he was ruthless. He exterminated them. And this was a very brutal time in Roman history. Nixon had this list called the Enemy, what was it called? The Political Enemies Project. And then he put the IRS out onto them. He would use all these backhanded tactics to undermine his opponents, political opponents, with the IRS, or he'd take away their federal grant approval. He would tie them up in court proceedings because he had the power of the purse. He had the money to tie up his opponents in these litigations. Anything backhanded he would do. And remember, they called him Tricky Dick, and that's probably one of the reasons why. He also, of course, was involved in that Watergate scandal. So what we're seeing here in Roman politics is that it's becoming increasingly guerrilla. It's like guerrilla warfare, right? Like Sulla brings a new element of carnage and viciousness into the Roman system that previously was driven by like the idealist ideas that Cincinnatus personified earlier on. Now it's becoming it's becoming more brutal and more dog eat dog. And the same thing's happening in American politics, starting with Nixon and going forward. Now, who came up after Sulla was, this is the Roman Games and US Pro Sports. I mean, it's a pretty easy one to see. Then you have, who came up, so Pompey Magnus comes up under Sulla, same as Reagan gets his start in the early days of Nixon. He wasn't really part of Nixon ticket, but so both Reagan and Sulla, they have a lot of personal characteristics that are similar. They both switch political parties for their political gain. They didn't care about which. Oh, by the way, I should mention this. So Rome had a two-party system. They were called the Optimates and the Populari. The Populari were about the rights of the average lower citizens, and the Optimates or the Optimates, they were about keeping the old patrician class in charge. And that really translates well to the Republicans and the Democrats. I mean, the Democrats are populares. They put their finger in the air and say, what does the population want? Okay, we'll change our ideas. The liberals, nothing's off the table for what we can change and what we can, and then the Republicans have generally been seen as the party of the ruling, like the rich elites, like the Rockefellers and the people with the money. That's not always true, but generally speaking, it does translate. So Pompey Magnus switched from either he was an Optimate and then he became a Populari or vice versa. I can't remember. But Reagan started out as a Democrat and he switched to Republican. They both divorced their first wives for political reasons. If you look back at Reagan, had a first wife who he expressly divorced because of some political disagreement. They both defeated the pirates. So Pompey Magnus was he got called up to help out against these pirates in the Mediterranean Ocean who were disrupting the Roman economy and grain shipments and Roman trade. So at the same time that's happening, Ronald Reagan, if you remember, there was that Iran hostage crisis that was happening under Carter. And the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, it was announced that the crisis was over and the hostages are going to be coming home. Then there's these hijackings going on during the time of Reagan. He has to put down these hijackings by Muslim terrorists or whatever. That's similar to the hijacking of boats by these pirates during Pompey's time. And they both put down these different hijackings and pirates, and they're both seen as kind of heroes for doing that. Pompey, he was the one who led the effort against the slaves during the servile wars. Like, remember the Spartacus revolt where Spartacus broke out? Okay, that happened under Pompey, and Reagan's known as the Union Buster. So Reagan, remember, in 1981, he fired 11,000 air traffic controllers, and he busted up their union. And I was reading some commentary on that. It says, I'm quoting here, it says, many historians see this as the beginning of the decline of the American middle class. Reagan, even though he's called Reagan the Great, everyone talks about Reagan economics, the Reagan era. Well, Pompey has this, he has a cognitive, they call it cognitive, or a suffix to it. They call him Magnus, which means the Great. They look back to him the same way. They both wear body armor under their clothes. Pompey was known for having body armor under his toga, and Reagan wore a bulletproof vest under his clothes as well. Let's see. They both established a relationship with God's temple. Pompey was the very first one to encounter the Jews in Jerusalem and start a relationship between them and the Jews. And Reagan was the very first one to open up diplomatic relations with the Vatican ever. It never happened before in American history. He was the first one to do that. Let's see here. I think I'm covering those pretty well. Okay, moving on. How are we doing for time? Oh, I got to hurry up. Sorry. All right. This is a Bush Caesar. Oh my, I got to fly through these. Okay, so Bush and Caesar, they both had this. They both went out and fought wars all over the place. So Caesar, I got to hurry. Okay, so Caesar, he went out into Gaul and he started the Gallic Wars. He found any excuse he could to stay there. Like there was these bickering tribes, I forget their names, the Helvetii were one, and they complained to Rome, hey, this other tribe's being mean to us. And so Caesar said, oh, I can help you. So he jumped in there and he brought his troops in, he started occupying Gaul, and he wouldn't leave. Any pretense he could to start another war with another tribe, he would march all over Gaul, and he would send propaganda messages back about what's happening with the wars back to Rome, so Rome could find out. But he didn't. He wrote it in the third person as if it was an objective account of the war, but it was actually coming from him, and it was a political spin because he had a political. And so during the Bush, when the Bushes were starting wars over in the Middle East and Afghanistan, same thing. They would find any pretext to stay over there. Weapons of mass destruction, sure, it didn't happen. It was a lie. The Kuwaiti invasion of Iraq. Okay, we need to go there and send troops over there now. So it was just constantly this like, we're going to occupy. The B men for this period was versus. Guess if I can find out who that is here. Where's it at? Oh boy. So where's it at? Well, I don't have it, but so the Roman in Caesar's time, the leader of the barbarians, they had no leader, but they said we need to get behind somebody. And so this one barbarian named Vercingetorix, he said, I will fight the Romans for you. All come under me and we'll fight together. All the Gallic tribes who were bickering came under him. Vercingetorix he used to work for Rome. He knew Roman tactics and Roman military tactics very well. And he said, I know the Romans. And so he led the barbarians. Just like how Osama bin Laden, who used to be an American used to pay, like we funded Osama bin Laden during the Afghanistan war against Russia. Right. So like he knew Americans very well. But he came up to unite the Muslim countries against America as well, just like Vercingetorix did to Rome. And Saddam Hussein is kind of like a Vercingetorix as well. This kind of boogeyman. I gotta move on from them because we're getting way short on time here. I apologize. All right, so this is the Siege of Alexandria in September 11th. They have the same parallels in the same time period. So Caesar, he was in Egypt and he lit his ships on fire. And the question was, did he do it on purpose or not? It's still speculated. We don't know. But he ended up burning down most of Alexandria, or a large part of it. But he destroyed the famous Library of Alexandria by doing this. And so, but you have this connection with the ships, his ships bringing down this very iconic building. And so, the conspiracy theories about 9/11, did the American government do it? We don't know. But the planes brought down this iconic World Trade Center as well. Then you have, this is the important one. So Caesar, he is in Gaul and he's getting very popular because of his reports he's sending back about the war, and the Romans love him. But then the Roman Senate says, we need to get rid of him. He's becoming too much of a threat to us. So Caesar has to make a decision. Am I going to let them arrest me and take me to jail? Or am I going to cross the Rubicon, which is the river northern Italy, and bring my forces into Rome, which is taboo? So Rome had, around the city of Rome, they had something called a palmarium. And inside the palmarium, no soldiers or armies were ever allowed to go. It was like their, quote, sacred line. And so Caesar broke that by bringing his soldiers across the Rubicon where his armies were not allowed to be. And he made Rome into a police state, kind of. Like everyone knew like Caesar could threaten them at any time with his army. And so Bush, same thing. America had this understanding that we don't spy on our own citizens. We do a lot of things outside of America that we never do inside of America, right? Like they would torture people in Guantanamo. You can't do that in America. They would commit all kinds of, like our wars would break. We wouldn't treat people in America like we treat people outside of America. But with the Homeland Security Act, people were starting to wonder, is Bush starting a police state by spying on us? Like no one really thought it was like the case then, but looking back, we see they were spying on us. Like remember the phone records that they were tapping the phones, and there's documentaries all over the internet that prove that the American government, with that one Homeland Security Act, it gave them the legal basis to start looking for terrorists in America now. We need to find the terrorists in America, right? So that all goes back to Caesar crossing the Rubicon. This stuff gets so deep. Here's the Gauls in Rome. The Gauls there. Okay. Now we have Clinton and Mark Antony. I need to kind of get away from him for a second, but I need to skip it. Cleopatra and Obama. Okay, I'm gonna go to a different slide to show you these things. What's this? What am I looking at here? Sorry. Okay, that's what I want to see. All right. This is the chronological timeline. But you have, okay, we did Bush and Caesar. Now we have Obama and Cleopatra. So Cleopatra was the ruler of Egypt. But so there's a debate, an academic debate as to whether she had a paternal grandfather who was actually a Black African. And so some people claim that she did. Some people claim that she didn't. But the point, though, is that there's this debate about it. And anyway, she ends up, for political reasons, falls in love, quote unquote, with Mark Antony. Mark Antony, he betrays Roman sensibilities by bringing her back to Rome and letting her kind of like dictate things behind the scenes. And the Romans are really disgusted by it because you have this foreigner who is not Roman coming into Rome and all of a sudden right into the heart of Roman politics and kind of acting as this like, and remember Caesar had an affair with her as well. So Mark Antony, or I'm sorry, Augustus Caesar, who's the last person on the list, he's the one who gets really upset about this mostly. And he demands that the sacred temple of Saturn be opened up so he can find out what's in Mark Antony's will. He wanted to find out if Mark Antony was going to will everything to Cleopatra against Roman practices and Roman civic virtue. So he never got access to that will, though, but he claimed that he did. And that piece of paper was going to prove if Cleopatra really was going to have like a say in Roman politics or not. Like you can look into the story, but the same thing happened with Donald Trump and Obama. So remember, there's a story that was circulating when Obama was running for president that he was not really an American citizen, right? And so Donald Trump starts the birther movement, wanting to find that piece of paper that proves that Obama really was from a foreigner. Just like how Augustus was trying to find that piece of paper that proved something similar about Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Obama, it's thought that his paternal grandmother was Kenyan, and that she's the one who got on TV. And I can't find the clip that said, "Oh yeah, I remember when he was a kid, he was born here," right? So there was that one there's that paternal grandfather thing again, or paternal grandmother thing. Hillary and Obama are like Cleopatra and Mark Antony because during the Hillary year or the Clinton years, the question was Hillary really running the country behind the scenes? Was she the woman behind the man that was really calling the shots? Just like the Romans were wondering if Cleopatra was calling the shots when Mark Antony was around. So, and then you have, okay, at the end of this, you have Augustus Caesar, who he says we need to go back and make Rome great like it used to be. Go back to our old Roman values, just like Trump says now, make America great again. So, and man, I flew through that. There's a lot of details I missed.
Sure.
Let's see here. Okay, this is another interesting thing. All right. During Augustus's time, Rome was transitioning from a republic to an empire. Now, it really was the transition started with Caesar. Caesar kind of was like a dictator, but unofficially a dictator. And the transition lasted from Caesar to Augustus, where it switched away from its republican system to like an imperial system, but it kept the facade of a republican system for a while. Just like America now is going through the same transition. Caesar would center power to himself, just like during the Bush years. He started issuing executive orders inordinately, and he was starting to make decisions apart from Congress and acting like a dictator, although unofficially. Caesar would do the same thing. So America has been transitioning from this republican system into this new imperial system where power is centered in one man. And so that's happening more and more. And that's why we just talk about democracy dying now. Do our votes count anymore? Is the election cycle useless? This is what Rome was going through the same thing because the Republican system was a facade more and more. And it starts with Augustus. He was really the first emperor. Looking backwards, the historians have named Augustus as the first emperor. So, excuse me, same thing happening now. Where am I at? I think I've almost covered everything.
So are we going to have Emperor Trump here within the next 6 months or so?
No, that's the idea. Augustus didn't call himself the emperor. He called himself the very first citizen. He didn't say I'm the emperor, but he said I'm the princeps. But yeah, the idea would be that more or less everyone, wink, wink, knows that the republic's gone, but no one can say it out loud because who dares to say that? Yeah. And no, there's more to this, but let me show you one. This is one thing another thing I wanted to show you. Let's make sure I hit everything on this slide. I did. Oh, no, this is a neat one too. I should talk about this one. The Catos, we're going to go back a bit, but the Catos, there was Cato the Elder and Cato the Younger. Cato the Younger was the grandson of Cato the Elder. And so they both, as Rome was losing its civic virtue, its altruistic republican virtue, or whatever you want to call it. And it became more autocratic. They had these like figures like Caesar and Mark Antony and Augustus. They were centering more and more power to themselves. The Catos were pure Republican, and they said we need to like go back to the actual principles of the Republic and go by them and just go by those principles. And so they were hated, but they were so pure in their Republican ideals that they kind of like had a following, but the oligarchs hated them. And so you have the Pauls doing the same thing at the same time. You have Ron Paul Sr. He was a libertarian candidate. He wanted to, we need to go back to Republican ideas and get away from all this, like, the gold standard needs to come back again. We know all the thing. But then he has his son, Rand Paul, similarly, still kind of carrying on the banner, just like the Catos did. I thought that was pretty cool. There's so many Roman figures that you can go back to. There's Cicero, and there's so many. And the more you look, you're more like, oh, look, that's this person over here, that person over here. And they really have all these resonances in chronological order with each other. Even the major thrusts and the major dynamics of the empire that were going on, the forces behind it, they're happening in America too, in parallel. And then this is, I'm almost done. I'm actually pretty happy I made through all this in one thing. Okay, this is a painting. This is kind of spooky. This is a painting on the Capitol, the Rotunda, the Capitol building in Washington D.C. And this is the there we go. Okay, this is on the very top of it. If you're inside the floor of Congress and you look up, this is what you'll see. It's called the apotheosis of George Washington, which means the deification of George Washington. So they actually painted something in the Capitol building, and they call it George Washington being made a god. And so what's so interesting about it is you'll see that that's the Roman fasces. So next to him is that lady holding that axe. So that's a Roman thing. And it's a symbol of Roman power. In fact, the name fascist, like Mussolini and the fascist, the name fascist comes from that fasces. And Mussolini took that fasces as a symbol. It just meant a symbol of authority, and it's very Roman. So you're making connections here between the deification of George Washington and Rome. And here you have like that whatever that person is holding the shield. It's kind of like a Roman kind of looking. There's an eagle on her head, very Roman looking. And why this is significant also is because Romulus founded the city of Rome. Rome is named after Romulus. So the story about Romulus is that he was actually taken up into a cloud and made into a god. So the Romans would say Romulus is one of our gods. And they say that he was taken up into a cloud and made one. And here you have George Washington in this painting sitting on a cloud it's called the deification of George Washington, directly paralleling what happened to Romulus. And remember, Washington, D.C. is named after Washington, just like Rome is named after Romulus. It's really like a lot of stuff going on. So I think the early Americans, they knew, and I saw a lot of these parallels. Or if they didn't, it's amazing that it happened anyway.
Right.
And then anything else here? No. And these are some quotes I found. If you look below, this is from Cicero. The Republic, the Senate, the law are worth defending at any price, and therefore I go to expose myself to the utmost danger. And then you have Patrick Henry saying, give me liberty or give me death. And then you have the immortal gods have given us the Republic as a blessing. It is our duty to defend it with our blood. That's Cato. And then Nathan Hale, I only regret that I have one life to lose for my country. So like what I'm showing is that the Romans would give their life for the Republic just like Americans would give their life for liberty. There's a lot of similarities between their fervor for the Republic, which is there. And I think, my goodness, I think I made most of it. The only thing I want to mention also is our current times. All right, this is the last segment, I promise. Okay, and then I'll shut up. The Romans, they end up conquering most of the ancient world by the time of Christ. The Romans called the Mediterranean Ocean, they called it Maris Nostrum, which means our sea. Like they just owned everything, and they just saw that as their little pond in the backyard, the Mediterranean Ocean. So they had complete control, and the people they subjugated just had to pay taxes and just do what Rome said. It was very hard for them to win any concessions from Rome. Anyway, the Roman elites at that time are like the globalists now. Like the system of globalism, really, like it's not just an American phenomenon, but it is a Western elitist phenomenon that we've implemented as Western society, and it really stems from Americans' power. Like it stems from World War II. World War II launched America into Europe, and then with the Marshall Plan, we've established our power in Europe and our authority or dominance, whatever you want to call it. And then that turned into that alliance between Europe and America that sets the stage for globalism. And now the globalists, all the companies that we call the globalist companies that have so much power, and like the big tech companies, all those things, they're all Western things. So really, the globalists now are like the Romans then, which is you can see a parallel for it. And even though I just told you that Trump and Augustus Caesar have all those parallels, they do. But this is very complicated. And I won't explain it here. But also Nero does as well. So, Nero and Trump, they both remember. Nero was he was despised by the political ruling elites because he was an actor. Nero liked to sing and act, and Trump likewise was a reality show star, a reality TV show star who is very distasteful for the upper class Americans to kind of like stomach the idea that their president was a reality show star, like this form of lower entertainment that was kind of like beneath the upper class. Nero had the same thing. Nero, of course, there was the Great Fire of Rome, and the question was, did Nero start it or not? We had the COVID years, which really it's like the Great Fire of the world, but it was a fake virus. But the idea was it real or not? Was it manufactured or not? And it ended up destroying a large part of the global economy. And it was done so as the Great Reset. Remember that the Great Reset was something that we're gonna take. The premise was, the unstated premise was, that we're gonna take a lot of the resources away from the lower classes, and we're gonna put them into the upper classes by this reset. And they called it the environmental Great Reset or whatever. But the idea was that you all need to stop sucking up these resources and get into your smart city and shut up. And then we're going to have more of a rich playground to play around with, whatever they wanted it for. But that was what happened with COVID. Well, Nero's fire was the same thing. So Nero, they said, did Nero start a fire or not? We don't know. But Nero built a huge palace after the fire was over. He sucked up all the land that was destroyed. He built this big opulent palace to himself called the Domus Aurea. And when the Romans saw that, they knew that Nero started the fire, right? And so Nero quickly cast blame onto the Christians for doing so, just like the COVID era was passing blame onto the unvaxxed or whoever else, the MAGAs. There was this finger pointing going on during that time 4 years ago. And there's more going on with Nero. But so Nero, he was very perverted, and he took a little boy named Sporus, and he mutilated the poor little boy and pretended he was of the opposite gender and married this little poor kid. Just like we have this going on in America now with this dysphoria of gender, right? It's a Nero parallel. It's happening, like Nero was doing that, and it's happening in America. I can go on and on, but I should shut up. Maybe I could do. That's a more controversial topic, and I don't want to get into it. But my point is that even our times now look like we're in the times of Nero. And my goodness, I should shut up. Okay. Anyway, what do you think?
Well, well. First of all, I do want to do some videos in the next few weeks, just for our Patreon viewers. So
Okay.
that's a cool idea. So if you have a controversial topic, maybe we can save it for that. I like that idea. I think it's one that YouTube might not like. So, well, we won't put it on YouTube, and that sounds good. I think that's something to look forward to in the future. And I mean, and there's so much, as you said, there's so much here. And I know the people listening are like, Dominic, you talk too fast, but no,
rewind it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Put it at half speed, maybe. But no, it's super fascinating. I love it, and I think that, to me, as always, whenever we do these shows, it really makes me want to go and learn more. And I think that's what's cool to me. That's like, this is really interesting stuff. And this was much less faith-based, obviously, or almost not at all.
Right.
This was really historical, but to me, that's really fascinating. I mean, I just learned a lot about Roman history that I didn't know before, and how it somehow reflects today is strange. I don't know what the right word is. I mean, kind of bizarre, but also really neat. And it shows you, yeah, God is almighty.
Right.
These things they're really, really, really fascinating. And no, I love it. And I mean, I guess, before we wrap up, I know it's all already an hour 8. I mean, how do people see more of this stuff? And I know I think you're writing a book. Are you writing a book about this type of topic?
I am. So I'm writing a book right now about it's about church history in the Old Testament. I'm culminating with Vatican II, and the books of the Maccabees. And the focus of the book is just in this, what you see before you is what I'm going to write a book on, except I have 400 pages of details that I'm trying to craft together. It's just about, it's getting close to done. I'm going to say hi to my editor, Fran. Thanks, Fran, for helping out. So that it's coming along pretty well. And then, excuse me, depending on how that goes, I do want to write, I have a lot more to do. I want to write a book about the prophecies of Daniel, which is, we talked about in one of the prior podcasts. And then I'm going to do one about Roman America as well, because I have to get this into there. But if you want to see more about these things, you can go to our website. Oh, I have a graphic for that. Well, actually, no, I do. Where's it at? I'll show you. I'll put my website name on the screen so you can see it. Right. It's a www.maccabeanuprising.com. Where is the thing at now? It's on one of these things here. This is it right there. Okay. Let me take this thing off in a minute here. So you can see it.
Yep.
And me. Okay. I'm gonna move me out of the way. Oh boy, so much going on the screen. All right, there we go. All right. So yeah. So www.maccabeanuprising.com. And that's the website where you can go to find Roman America, Old Testament church history, and a lot more as well. I have videos linked onto there. I have a PDF, a 500 some page PDF that has everything in it. A part of that, I'm turning that into my book, but I have to, the PDF is just like really rough writing. I wrote like late at night, and there's some misspellings in it, and my grammar's bad, but I'm taking that text and I'm polishing it up to make a book out of it. So that's part of that there. Also, I do want to say that, I wanted to ask you, do you think this is going to come out before Lent or not? Because if it comes out,
we'll do it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Because my book should be done within a month, and I'll have the link on this website. So if you go to the website, like as soon as you log on, you'll see the book, and that'll be there.
No, it's it's super exciting. I know. I mean, it's one of those things that they're so. You see history books, and you see things out there, a dime a dozen, but it's hard to know who wrote them. You see John Smith wrote this book, so it's nice to put a name to that, a face to this book, and it's. My goodness, is it interesting? I mean, I think I am sure we're gonna have some of our listeners and viewers here going to the website and checking out the book, because fascinating stuff. And I think what's beautiful about it is how it all works. It's kind of like when you look up at the stars, you look at the trees, you look at the mountains, and it all works. God
It does.
God did a good job. He did a good job. They said it in the Bible, right? And God saw what He did, and it was good. And I think that's a neat thing. And I think that's something that I appreciate when people can put that into perspective and to see the glory of God. And that's what we're all about, right?
I agree. I mean, this shows the reason why the Roman America stuff isn't really. It's not like, you're right. It's not about our faith, except that it was part of the ancient world, and the people had to deal with Rome. But I love how the nucleus, the core, the most important thing here for us right now is, I think, to see those parallels between Vatican II and the books of the Maccabees, because that has an immediate effect on our life. Like if you're watching this and you're not a traditional Catholic, that calls you out of the Novus Ordo, because you see that then the second altar and the abomination are happening in our own time, and it calls you to get out right away. So that is the most important thing for us now. But it also, in having the whole Old Testament prefigured church history, it also gives glory to God and His church, because it shows you that the church actually says who she says she is. And we all know that by faith, but this kind of shows you that by linking it to the Old Testament in chronological order, the implications pop right out. And so it's just so wonderful. God's omnipotence, it hits you in a way that hasn't hit me before, because you actually see more details to how powerful He is. And the thing about Roman America, though, is that it puts America, I think, in its proper place. How did the early Christians, or how did the Jews of the Old Testament, how did they view Rome? Well, now we have this corollary. It's neat because we can see if America has all these. You can see the idea of republicanism in the Old Testament in Rome, and you can see it in American history, and it gives it a proper context, I think. Which that's why I find that useful too. When I was doing these parallels in the Old Testament, I loved it because I was reading the Old Testament, and I was reading church encyclicals, and I was reading the lives of the saints and seeing these connections, and it was so cool because it was glorious, it was uplifting, it was edifying. And then I got depressed because when I started seeing parallels with Roman America, I was fascinated by them, but it was oh man, it's just a bunch of secular stuff, but I wanted to do them just the same because I want to document them, but I was less, I didn't feel elevated inside. I felt okay, it's amazing. It's amazing, but like I was just like, it's just earthly stuff, if that makes sense. Anyway,
No,
yeah,
totally.
yeah, talking again. Thank you again for having me on, and I really appreciate this so much to give me a platform to do this, because it's these things spin around in my head, and I try to document them, and it's so nice to be able to get some airtime for them. So thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you. I really thoroughly enjoy it. We hope to do more with you here in the coming weeks, coming months. Everyone, let us know. Comment. Let us know if you want to see more from Dominic. If you want to see more of this content. I find it interesting. I want to see more, but you tell us. We
Yeah,
want to hear from you. You guys are the ones that matter. So tell us if you want to see more from Dominic. And please go and support Dominic. And hey, go buy the book when it's out. That again, these are things I know we talk about every time, but support people who
yeah,
are creating good content. That I don't need to say more. I'm not gonna beat that drum too much, but there aren't many people doing it. So the few people that are, please go support them whatever way you can. And as I've said so many times, for us, if it's on Patreon, if it's $2 a month, man, that makes a big difference. It really does. $2 a month that's awesome. And that, I think most people can do that. I can do that. I can give someone $2 a month, and that's what I think we need to think of. Just these little bit of a help, and who knows? If you get $2 a month, if we all do it for Dominic could go write some books that are maybe they'll go change the world, right? Who knows, right? We'll see what we can do. We're gonna do the best we can. We're gonna do the best we can to glorify God. But yeah, help out Dominic. Go over and again, hey, go check out that website. See when his book is out. Dominic, do you have social media or anything, or should people just kind of keep an eye on your website?
I do. I do. If you go to Facebook, I have a page. I don't check it very much. I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
go there. But YouTube, you can go to YouTube, or write me an email if you want to, communicate. It's just it's Maccabeanuprising@gmail.com. So it's the same thing you see below me, Maccabean Uprising, but it's just at gmail.com. You can do that. Um, Basically, that's how you can contact me. And you
Perfect.
can find me personally on Facebook if you want to do that. You can, I probably will respond. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Awesome. No, that's good enough. No, perfect. Well, again, Dominic, thank you so much for coming on, and we hope to have you on again soon to talk about one of these many. As you said, you go through this so fast. It's like, oh well, there's another topic that I'm sure could be another hour show.
Oh my
And
god.
there's a topic that could be another hour show, and there's another topic. So I have no doubt we'll have you on again. I always appreciate it when you come on. And
Okay. Great.
until next time, God
All
bless
right.
you.
Thanks, Kevin.